You planted flowers specifically to help pollinators. Color, fragrance, a steady stream of bees and butterflies all season long. Instead, your pollinator numbers dropped. Fewer bees, fewer butterflies. Here is what almost nobody tells you. Certain popular, widely sold perennials do not just fail to help pollinators. They actively harm them through poison nectar, flower shapes that overexpose insects, or plants that trick butterflies into laying eggs that will never survive. 7 plants, all commonly sold as pollinator-friendly, all capable of harming the exact insects they appear to attract. If you are not subscribed, hit that button now. Every week I put out content like this. Research-backed, specific, and built around what actually helps your garden. Plant 1. Rhododendron and azalea. Rhododendrons and azaleas are everywhere. Big, glossy, covered in flowers every spring. One of the most popular shrubs you can buy. But the nectar inside those flowers contains a natural toxin that messes with a bee's nervous system. Bees that feed on rhododendron nectar bring it back to the hive, and the honey made from it carries the same toxin. Bees that eat too much of it start flying erratically. They lose coordination, struggle to find their way back, and in bad cases, they become paralyzed and die. This is not new information either. Ancient Greek and Roman writers describe people getting sick from eating honey made near rhododendron-heavy regions, long before anyone understood why. Today, beekeepers in places like the Pacific Northwest and Turkey's Black Sea coast deliberately move their hives away from these plants during bloom season because they know what happens otherwise. Butterflies are affected the same way. In gardens packed with rhododendrons, butterflies are documented, foraging less effectively than they do around more varied, safer flowers. The problem is that rhododendrons look like the perfect pollinator plant. Big flowers, reliable blooms, evergreen all year. That appearance is exactly why so many gardeners keep planting them without knowing what is actually happening to the bees feeding on them. Plant 2. Oleander. Oleander is a favorite in warm climates because it barely needs any care. It handles drought, heat, and neglect better than almost anything else. That toughness is exactly why it gets planted everywhere, often without a second thought. But every single part of this plant is toxic, including the nectar. Bees that visit oleander flowers pick up that toxin along with the nectar, and it interferes directly with how their hearts and nervous systems function. Bees that spend a lot of time feeding on oleander show clumsy flying, trouble navigating, and noticeably shorter lifespans. The shape of the flower makes it worse. Bees have to push deep into the bloom to reach the nectar, which means more contact with the toxic parts of the flower per visit compared to simpler, more open flowers. This becomes a bigger problem at scale. Cities and businesses across the southern U.S. and the Mediterranean plant huge hedges of oleander because it is cheap and tough, which means in some areas it becomes one of the only nectar sources around, leaving bees with few safer options nearby. Butterflies show the same pattern. Lower survival rates in areas where oleander makes up a large share of the available flowers. Plant 3. Daffodils get planted by the millions every fall because they bloom early, right when almost nothing else is flowering yet. That timing makes them look like a generous early gift to hungry, just waking up bees. In reality, it is closer to a trap. The nectar and pollen in daffodils contain compounds that bees do not actually like, and in some cases that are mildly toxic to them. Studies tracking bee visits show they clearly prefer other early spring flowers when given the choice. They are not flocking to daffodils, they are mostly avoiding them. Here is why the timing makes it worse rather than better. Bees coming out of winter have the least amount of stored energy and the fewest food options available. If a bee colony wastes precious early season foraging trips on a flower that gives little nutritional return, that is energy and time it cannot get back during the one period of the year when it matters most. This hits solitary bees, which make up most native bee species, especially hard since they fly shorter distances and have less flexibility to simply go find better flowers elsewhere. Research has linked daffodil-heavy early spring landscapes to lower reproduction rates in these bees the following year. Plant 4. Foxglove. Foxglove gets marketed constantly as a top pollinator plant, mostly because the visual is so convincing. Bumblebees climb deep into those tall, tubular flowers and come out covered in pollen. It looks like the perfect partnership. What that picture leaves out is that foxglove nectar contains a compound that affects a bee's heart and nervous system. Bumblebees that feed heavily on it show measurable problems afterward. They have a harder time learning, they forage less efficiently, and their flight patterns become noticeably less steady. The flower shape narrows the damage to one specific group. Only bumblebees with long enough tongues can really get into a foxglove bloom, which means this risk falls almost entirely on a type of bee that is already struggling in many areas due to habitat loss, rather than being spread across many different pollinator species. A bumblebee that is slightly impaired forages less efficiently and burns more energy collecting the same amount of food. Multiply that across an entire colony over a season, and you get a documented drop in how much the colony can store, which directly affects whether it can successfully raise new queens. On top of that, foxglove spreads aggressively on its own, so once it is established, this problem tends to keep going year after year without anyone replanting it. 4 plants down, 3 more to go, including the plant responsible for one of the most well-documented cases of butterflies being tricked into a fatal mistake, and the plant that looks full of flowers but is basically empty on the inside. Stay with me. Plant 5. Black and pale swallowwort. This one does not poison anything. It works through deception, and that makes it arguably worse for monarch butterflies than any toxic plant on this list. Black and pale swallowwort look enough like real milkweed. Similar leaves, similar seed pods, that gardeners trying to help monarchs sometimes plant it by mistake. And so do the butterflies themselves. Female monarchs are hardwired to lay their eggs on milkweed. When they encounter swallowwort, they often cannot tell the difference and lay eggs on it instead. The problem is that swallowwort is not actually milkweed, and monarch caterpillars cannot survive on it. Research has confirmed that caterpillars hatched on this plant almost never make it to the next stage of their life cycle. They simply die. Every female monarch tricked into using it as a host plant has effectively lost her entire reproductive effort for nothing, given how much monarch populations have already declined because of lost milkweed habitat. Having a plant in your yard that actively fools them into a dead end is one of the most damaging things a well-meaning pollinator gardener can accidentally do. And this is not rare. Swallowwort has spread widely across the northeastern and midwestern U.S. and into Canada, often in the exact same disturbed areas where people plant pollinator gardens. Plant 6. Double-flowered varieties. If you have ever bought a double-flowered rose or dahlia because it looked fuller and more impressive than a regular one, you bought a flower that may be giving pollinators almost nothing. Double flowers are created through breeding that turns the plant's reproductive parts, the bits that normally make pollen, into extra petals instead. The flower ends up looking bigger and showier, but in many cases it produces dramatically less nectar and pollen than the simpler single-flowered version of the same plant. Sometimes it produces none at all. Here's the trap for bees and butterflies. The flower still looks exactly as attractive from the outside. Same color, same shape, same scent in most cases. So pollinators still fly over and land on it expecting a reward. They get little or nothing in return. Multiply that across a whole garden bed full of double-flowered roses or peonies, and pollinators are burning real energy investigating flowers that simply do not pay off. This is a bigger problem than people realize because double-flowered varieties are usually the ones marketed as the premium, more attractive option at the nursery. So well-meaning gardeners often end up choosing the worse option for pollinators without knowing it. Plant 7. Butterfly bush. Bush has one of the most misleading names in gardening. It is sold specifically because it pulls in huge numbers of adult butterflies, and it genuinely does. But that is the entire relationship. It gives butterflies a snack and nothing else. Butterfly larvae do not eat just any plant. Monarch caterpillars need milkweed. Swallowtail caterpillars need specific native trees and shrubs. These relationships developed over a very long time between native plants and native butterflies. Butterfly bush is originally from China and has no history with any North American butterfly species, so no butterfly lays eggs on it. It is nectar with zero connection to the next generation. That means a garden full of butterfly bush can look like a thriving butterfly habitat, adults flying around, feeding, looking healthy, while contributing absolutely nothing to butterfly reproduction in that area. It gets worse. Butterfly bush spreads aggressively on its own in many regions and is officially classified as invasive across large parts of North America and Europe. As it spreads, it crowds out the native plants that butterfly caterpillars actually depend on to survive, meaning it can directly shrink the very habitat butterflies need, while only offering adults an empty meal in return. Several states now actively restrict or manage it because of this. Impact feeds adult butterflies, but provides no host plant value for any North American species caterpillars. Spreads aggressively and is classified invasive in many regions. Can crowd out the native plants caterpillars actually need. Every plant on this list shares the same pattern. It looks like a great pollinator plant, and the marketing usually says so too. But what it actually does once a bee or butterfly shows up tells a completely different story. A garden full of flowers does not automatically mean a garden that helps pollinators. Some of these plants poison them. Some trick them. Some just waste their time and energy with nothing to show for it. None of that is visible just by looking at a healthy, flowering plant. You have to know what is actually happening once the insect lands. Before planting anything specifically to help bees and butterflies, it is worth checking it against your local Native Plant Society's recommendations. Native plants, which evolved alongside your local pollinators, are almost always the safest and most reliable choice. If this changed how you think about even one plant in your garden plan, subscribe right now. Every week I put out content like this, built around the research most gardening content skips entirely. Hit the bell. Drop a comment below. Tell me which plant on this list surprised you most. I read every one. See you in the next one.